The fluorescent lights of Tech Dynamics' open plan office buzzed overhead as I cleaned out my desk. Around me, former colleagues stared at their screens, deliberately avoiding eye contact. Only my desktop succulent, a hardy little plant that had survived 3 years of corporate politics, was making the journey with me from the engineering department to the maintenance closet. My name is Alex Chen, and at 28, I'd just been demoted from senior software engineer to janitor, all because I refused to give CEO Marcus Sterling what he wanted, full credit for my work. Need help carrying your things to your new office, Alex? Derek Sterling, the CEO's nephew and my immediate supervisor, smirked as he passed by. Though I guess it's just a closet now. I carefully wrapped my succulent in paper. I've got it, thanks. The past 6 months at Tech Dynamic had been a masterclass in corporate toxicity. What started as subtle credit stealing had evolved into outright harassment after I'd refused to let Marcus Sterling put his name on my quantum encryption algorithm. Now, instead of firing me, which would have violated my contract and given me grounds for a lawsuit, they'd found a more creative way to push me out. All employees must be utilized according to their demonstrated capabilities. Marcus had announced at this morning's all-hands meeting, and Alex Chen has demonstrated that they're better suited to maintenance than engineering. The laughter still echoed in my ears. 3 years of innovative solutions, successful projects, and glowing client reviews, all erased because I wouldn't play by Sterling's rules. What no one at Tech Dynamic knew, what no one could know yet, was that I'd seen this coming months ago. More importantly, I prepared for it. In the maintenance office, Joe Martinez, the actual head of maintenance, helped me set up a small desk in the corner. This isn't right, Alex. You're the best engineer we've got. Thanks, Joe. I placed my succulent on the metal desk. But maybe they're right. Maybe I am better suited for maintenance. Joe's weathered face crinkled with concern. He'd been at Tech Dynamic for 20 years, keeping the building's systems running while executives like Sterling took credit for others' innovations. We'd become friends during my late-night coding sessions, when he'd bring me coffee and share stories about all the corporate drama he'd witnessed over the years. You're up to something, he said quietly. I know that look. I smiled, just focusing on my new responsibilities. Oh-ha, he didn't believe me, but he also didn't push. That's what I liked about Joe. He understood the value of keeping certain cards close to your chest. My phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Emily Wong at Quantum Dynamics, Tech Dynamics' biggest client and competitor. Patent office confirmed. Announcement on schedule for Monday. You ready? All set, I replied, thinking about the encrypted hard drive hidden in my apartment. 2 years of work, thousands of lines of code, and dozens of sleepless nights had led to this moment. The maintenance office had a small window overlooking the parking lot. I watched Marcus Sterling climb into his Tesla, probably heading to another business dinner where he'd take credit for his employees' innovations. He'd built his reputation and fortune on that practice, finding talented engineers, pressuring them to sign over their work, then discarding them when they resisted. I'd known about Sterling's methods before I took the job at Tech Dynamic. In fact, it was exactly why I'd chosen this company 3 years ago, fresh out of my PhD program at MIT. While my classmates had chased positions at Google and Apple, I deliberately picked a mid-sized firm with a CEO known for stealing innovations. Because sometimes to catch a thief, you have to let them think they're the smartest person in the room. That evening, as I cleaned the engineering department's floors, watching my former teammates pack up for the day, Derek stopped by for one final taunt. You know, he said, leaning against a desk, you could have had it all. Uncle Marcus would have made you rich if you just played along. Now look at you. I ran the mop under his expensive shoes, forcing him to step back. We all end up where we belong, Derek. He laughed. Keep telling yourself that while you're scrubbing toilets. After everyone left, I sat in my maintenance office, reviewing the email I'd received from my patent attorney earlier that day. Everything was in place. The application I'd filed 2 years ago, long before I'd ever shown my quantum encryption algorithm to anyone at Tech Dynamic, had been approved. The timing couldn't have been better. Joe came in with 2 cups of coffee. Want to talk about it? I took a cup, inhaling the familiar aroma. You ever play chess, Joe? Used to, not much time these days. My grandfather taught me, I said, thinking about the lessons that had brought me here. He always said the most important moves are the ones you make before your opponent knows the game has started. Joe's eyes sparkled with understanding. And when did this game start, Alex? 2 years, 4 months, and 16 days ago, when I first read about Marcus Sterling's pattern of stealing patents from his engineers. I pulled up an article on my phone, one of many about Sterling's business practices, most focused on his genius for spotting innovative technology. A few mentioned the string of engineers who'd left the company under mysterious circumstances. None had managed to prove anything. The thing about men like Sterling, I continued, is that they're so used to taking what they want, they never stop to ask why someone would make it so easy to take. Joe leaned back, realization dawning. The algorithm you've been working on, the one they've been pressuring you about, I nodded, is a trap. A very elaborate, very carefully designed trap. And they're about to spring it? No, I said, checking my watch. They already have. They just don't know it yet. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Dr. Wong. Board meeting concluded. Press release approved. Monday will be interesting. Joe studied my face. You know, in 20 years, I've seen a lot of people try to fight back against Sterling. None of them won. That's because they tried to fight him directly, I said, standing to begin my evening cleaning rounds. But the best way to beat someone like Sterling isn't to fight them. It's to let them believe they've already won. As I pushed my cleaning cart through Tech Dynamics' quiet halls, I thought about all the nights I'd spent here, allegedly working on the algorithms Sterling wanted so badly. In reality, I've been laying groundwork for something much bigger. Every line of code, every technical document, every presentation had been carefully crafted for this moment. Monday morning, when Quantum Dynamics made their announcement, Marcus Sterling would learn an expensive lesson about underestimating the people he thought he could use and discard. But for now, I had floors to mop and trash cans to empty. After all, a good chess player knows that sometimes the best position on the board looks like the worst. And I had 48 hours until checkmate. Monday morning arrived with the kind of perfect clarity that only comes before a storm. I was polishing the glass doors of Tech Dynamics' lobby when Marcus Sterling strode in, tablet in hand, radiating the smug confidence of a man who thought he owned not just the building, but everyone in it. Chen, he barked. There's a scuff mark by the elevator. Take care of it. I nodded, hiding my smile as I checked my watch. 8:47 a.m. Quantum Dynamics press conference would begin in exactly 13 minutes. The lobby began filling with employees heading to their morning meetings. Direk arrived, already looking at his phone as he walked toward the executive elevator. He stopped suddenly, frowning at his screen. Uncle Marcus, he called out, you need to see this. I kept polishing the glass, watching their reflections as they huddled over Derek's phone. Their expressions shifted from confusion to concern to something approaching panic. Get legal on the phone, Marcus snapped. Now, 8:55 a.m., right on schedule. By 9 o'clock a.m., Tech Dynamics lobby had transformed into chaos. Executives rushed between offices, phones rang incessantly, and a crowd had gathered around the wall-mounted TV displaying CNBC's tech news coverage. Breaking news from the quantum computing sector, the anchor announced. Quantum Dynamics has announced a revolutionary breakthrough in encryption technology. CEO Dr. Emily Wong is live at their headquarters to demonstrate what they're calling the future of data security. The camera cut to Dr. Wong, standing before a packed auditorium. What we're unveiling today isn't just an improvement in encryption. It's a fundamental paradigm shift in how we protect digital information. Marcus Sterling's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. The algorithm she was describing, the one being demonstrated on screens behind her, looked remarkably similar to the one I'd been developing at Tech Dynamic, the one Sterling had been pressuring me to sign over to him. But there were crucial differences. Differences that only someone with a PhD in quantum computing would notice. Differences that made this version significantly more advanced than what I'd shown Tech Dynamic. Most importantly, Dr. Wong continued, this technology is fully protected by patents filed over 2 years ago by its original inventor. The presentation screen changed to display a patent document. There was my name, clear as day, primary inventor, Alex Chen, Ph.D. The lobby fell silent. Every head turned toward where I stood with my cleaning supplies. You. Marcus Sterling's voice shook with rage. My office. Now. I carefully placed my cleaning supplies in their designated spot. Of course, stir. Though you might want to see the rest of Dr. Wong's presentation first. On screen, Dr. Wong was explaining the partnership aspects of the patent. This technology will be licensed exclusively through quantum dynamics, with strict ethical guidelines for its implementation. We're particularly excited about its applications in protecting personal privacy and preventing corporate espionage. Sterling's face went from purple to ash white as she continued. We've already identified several instances of attempted theft of this technology, including, she paused for effect, documented cases of corporate executives attempting to pressure the inventor into surrendering the rights. The display behind her showed emails, meeting recordings, and documentation. All the evidence I've been carefully collecting for 2 years. Every attempt by Sterling and his nephews to steal my work. Every threat. Every instance of harassment, all meticulously archived and timestamped. Security, Sterling barked. Escort Chen out of the building. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, you might want to hold off on that. I showed him the email I just received from Tech Dynamics Board of Directors, requesting my immediate presence at an emergency meeting. It seems we're both expected upstairs. The next few hours were a blur of revelations. In the boardroom, I explained how I developed 2 versions of the encryption algorithm. The first, the one I'd shown Tech Dynamic, was real but intentionally flawed. Any attempt to implement it would have exposed user data instead of protecting it. The actual working version had been developed in secret, patented early, and licensed to Quantum Dynamics. You deliberately deceived this company, Sterling accused. No, I corrected him. I deliberately created a honeypot to catch a corporate thief. Every attempt you made to steal my work was documented and will be included in the SEC investigation that begins. I checked my watch. Right about now. On cue, the boardroom door opened to admit 2 FBI agents and a representative from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Mr. Sterling, one agent began, we have some questions about a pattern of intellectual property theft at Tech Dynamic. What followed was the corporate equivalent of a controlled demolition. As federal agents combed through Tech Dynamics records, more victims of Sterling's patent theft scheme came forward. Former employees revealed similar stories of stolen innovations and forced resignations. By evening, Marcus Sterling had been suspended pending investigation. Direct and several other executives were placed on administrative leave. The board appointed an interim CEO, Dr. Sarah Martinez, a respected engineer who left Tech Dynamic years ago after her own clash with Sterling. I have to ask, Dr. Martinez said when we met the next day. Why go through all this? Why not just take your algorithm straight to quantum dynamics? I thought about all the brilliant engineers whose innovations Sterling had stolen, whose careers he derailed. Because sometimes stopping a thief isn't enough. You have to change the system that enabled them. The changes came quickly after that. Tech Dynamics Board instituted new policies protecting engineers' intellectual property rights. The company established an ethics committee with real power to investigate complaints. And most importantly, they created a fund to compensate former employees whose innovations had been stolen. Joe found me in my maintenance office, packing up my few belongings. So what's next for the chess master? I smiled, picking up my succulent. Quantum Dynamics offered me a position heading their new security division, but I think I might stay here instead. Here? He looked surprised. After everything? Dr. Martinez offered me a role as Chief Innovation Officer, focusing on fostering ethical technology development. I showed him the offer letter. Plus, someone needs to help rebuild this company the right way. And the algorithm, the patent, will be licensed fairly with profits shared among all contributors. I thought about the trust fund I'd established with the licensing fees, dedicated to helping young engineers protect their innovations. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying something corrupt, it's about building something better in its place. 1 year later, I stood at a podium in Tech Dynamics Auditorium, addressing a new class of engineering interns. The company had transformed. Under Dr. Martinez's leadership, we become known for ethical innovation and engineer empowerment. Our stock price had actually increased once investors realized that sustainable success was more profitable than stolen shortcuts. The most valuable thing you have isn't your code or your patents, I told the interns. It's your integrity. Guard it as carefully as you guard your innovations. Marcus Sterling eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of intellectual property theft. Direct and several other executives faced civil penalties. But more importantly, their downfall sparked an industry-wide conversation about corporate ethics and inventor rights. These days, when I pass the maintenance office, I always stop to chat with Joe. He keeps a chessboard in there now, and sometimes we play a game after hours. He's gotten quite good, especially at the long strategic plays. "You know what I still don't understand?" he said during one of our games. "How did you know Sterling would take the bait? What if he actually respected your rights to the algorithm?" I moved my queen into position for checkmate. People like Sterling are predictable precisely because they think they're clever. They're so used to taking what they want, they never stop to question why something valuable is left unprotected. Like leaving your queen exposed. Exactly. I smiled as he saw the trap too late. Sometimes the best way to win isn't to guard your most valuable piece, it's to make it look vulnerable while you set up the real victory. My office now has a view of Lake Washington, but I kept the succulent from my maintenance desk. It sits next to my PhD diploma and the framed patent document, reminding me that sometimes you have to be willing to look powerless to achieve real power. Last week, a young engineer from another company reached out for advice about a supervisor trying to steal her innovation. I took her to coffee and shared my story. By the end of our conversation, she had a plan to protect her work and the confidence to stand her ground. Because that's the thing about corporate thieves. They only win when we believe their position makes them invincible. But true innovation, like true justice, doesn't come from power or position. It comes from the willingness to think differently, to play the long game, and sometimes to clean a few floors while waiting for checkmate. Marcus Sterling thought he was demoting an engineer to janitor. Instead, he promoted me to the one position I needed to expose decades of corruption. Now, every time I walk into Tech Dynamics' lobby, I look at the company's new mission statement etched in the glass: Innovation with Integrity. Below it in smaller letters is a quote I suggested: "The best innovations come from those who understand every level of a system." It makes me smile every time I read it. After all, some of the most important work I ever did here was with a mop in my hands. And some of the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what you did.
The coastal wind carried the familiar scent of salt and pine as I turned onto the driveway of my Malibu beach house, expecting the quiet sanctuary I had spent years saving for. The sun glinted off the waves beyond the terrace, but what should have been a calm morning was shattered the moment I laid eyes on the scene. Cars I didn't recognize were scattered across the driveway. Music blared from the house, and children ran recklessly through my garden, kicking balls into the flower beds I had tended with such care. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my stomach twisting. My furniture was displaced, wicker chairs draped with towels and clothes, and the vibrant red geraniums I had nurtured for years were trampled beneath small feet. Every corner of this house represented late nights, extra shifts, and months of careful saving. This wasn't just a home. It was the embodiment of my independence, the result of my determination to build something that belonged solely to me. I stepped out of the car, keys in hand, trying to steady my racing heart. That's when I saw her, Lillian, standing on the terrace with an air of ownership that made my chest tighten. Her family surrounded her, grinning with the arrogance of entitlement. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I was no longer entering my sanctuary. I was stepping into a hostile occupation. Memories of signing the mortgage, painting the walls, and planting each flower came flooding back. I had fought for this, scrimped and saved for it, and now it was treated as if it belonged to anyone but me. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to take a deep breath, holding on to the calm I knew I needed. I lifted my keys and walked toward the front door, each step weighted with disbelief and resolve, knowing that what awaited inside would demand every ounce of patience and strength I had. The confrontation began the moment I crossed the threshold. What is this parasite doing here? We have no space for you. Lillian's voice cut through the music and laughter like a knife. My stomach lurched as I froze on the doorstep, the words echoing in my head. I could feel every eye on me. the smirks and whispers of her family slicing into my confidence. Her teenage cousins snickered from the terrace, and her mother leaned against the railing with a look of smug superiority, sizing me up as though I were nothing more than an intruder. One of Lillian's children darted past, almost knocking over the wicker chairs, while another held a ball aloft, challenging me with a playful yet defiant grin. Their presence, so casual and unashamed, made it clear that they had claimed my home as their own. I swallowed hard, my hands tightening around the keys I still held. Shock and humiliation churned inside me, a storm of disbelief and rising anger. How could someone I called my sister treat me like this? How could she parade her family through a house I had earned, with every dollar and every hour of sweat and sacrifice I had poured into it? I wanted to speak, to demand they leave, but the words stuck in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to leave quietly. And yet another part of me, smaller but fiercer, refused to yield. This house, my sanctuary, could not be surrendered so easily. I took a slow step forward, then another, forcing myself to breathe and focus. The confrontation had begun, and I would not retreat, no matter the faces glaring back at me. I squared my shoulders and met Lillian's gaze, ready to assert what was mine. The battle for my home was about to unfold. I stopped in front of my home office, the room I had always kept locked and organized, my sanctuary of paperwork and important documents. My fingers trembled as I opened a drawer that should have been untouched. Inside, I found a stack of folders I didn't recognize, labeled with my name but filled with papers that weren't mine. At first, I thought it was a mistake, an accidental misplacement, until I saw the legal documents applications attempting to transfer the house into Lillian's name, citing me as incapable of managing valuable property. My stomach dropped. I read through the notes carefully. There were letters, unsigned medical statements, and even emails between Lillian and someone claiming to be a legal advisor. They outlined a plan to present me as incompetent, to make it appear legitimate that the property should be transferred. The timeline had been carefully prepared. This was not a spur-of-the-moment intrusion. Someone had plotted this, and my sister was at the center of it. I sank into the chair, heart pounding, a mix of fear and rage surging through me. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an overreach. It was a calculated betrayal, a deliberate attempt to steal from me. Every late night I had worked, every penny I had saved, every moment I spent building this house was being undermined by someone I trusted. A flood of questions raced through my mind. How could Lillian manipulate the law against her own sister? How could she recruit others to her cause, fabricating documents, exploiting loopholes, and assuming I wouldn't notice until it was too late? Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, to yell, to demand justice on the spot, but another part recognized the danger of acting impulsively. I forced myself to take a deep breath and think clearly. I couldn't let anger blind me. I needed a plan, evidence, and legal counsel. I had to protect not just the house, but the integrity of everything I had built with my own hands. As I gathered the folders and placed them into my bag, I felt a sense of resolve hardening inside me. This betrayal would not go unanswered. The next step had to be precise, calculated, and decisive. I locked the office door behind me and moved toward the phone to make the call that would begin my counterattack. I sat at the kitchen table, the folders spread around me, and took a deep breath. My first priority was securing my finances. I called the bank, verified account balances, and requested immediate freezes on any access by third parties. Every penny I had saved over the years needed to be untouchable. The thought that Lillian or anyone else could manipulate my resources sent a shiver down my spine. But I forced myself to stay calm and focused. Once my accounts were secured, I made the call I had been dreading but knew was necessary. Thomas Grant, a family law attorney with a reputation for handling property disputes, answered professionally and listened without interruption as I explained the situation. I could feel my voice tighten at times, but I forced it steady. He assured me he could take action, but emphasized the importance of clear, organized evidence. I spent the next hours meticulously cataloging everything: property deeds, receipts, photos of damaged furniture, and lists of missing personal items. I included screenshots of emails and text messages, anything that demonstrated premeditation. Every piece of evidence added weight to my case, transforming my frustration into a structured plan. As I worked, my thoughts drifted to Lillian. She was my sister, the person I had once trusted above all others, and now she had betrayed me with deliberate intent. Part of me wanted to scream, to confront her immediately, to let her see the full measure of my anger and disappointment, but I knew that acting impulsively could jeopardize everything. Justice requires strategy, patience, and control. By the time I leaned back in my chair, the sun had begun its descent over the ocean, painting the room with long shadows. I felt a mix of determination and lingering sorrow, knowing that the road ahead would test every ounce of my resolve. I gathered the evidence, packed the folders, and prepared to meet Thomas Grant in his office the following afternoon. Tomorrow, the counterattack will begin. The morning air was crisp as I stepped out of the taxi, the folders of evidence clutched firmly in my hands. Thomas Grant arrived moments later, his expression calm but resolute, accompanied by a uniformed police officer and a notary. I followed him toward the house, each step steady, every muscle alert. Today was the day the invasion would end. From the terrace, I saw Lillian and her family laughing, unaware that the law was about to intervene. Their faces froze as they spotted the official plates on the police cruiser, the sharp click of the notary's briefcase, and Thomas walking with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how to dismantle their plan. The shock on Lillian's face was instantaneous, her triumphant expression faltering as reality struck. Thomas handed her the eviction papers, and the officer began to read them aloud, detailing the violations: illegal occupation, property damage, theft of personal items, and falsification of documents. Lillian's hands trembled, and she stumbled over her words. Her earlier arrogance replaced with panic. The children clung to her, confused, as the seriousness of the situation settled over the group. I watched silently, my heartbeat steady, my mind clear. Every move, every detail had been anticipated. Their smug confidence, the casual way they had treated my home as theirs, had blinded them to the consequences of their actions. Each page of the documents I had prepared, each photograph of the damage, each receipt proving ownership and care, reinforced the strength of my position. Veronica tried to argue, her voice high and sharp, insisting the house belonged to the family. But Thomas countered calmly, citing the evidence, the law, and the notarized documents. Lillian's mother looked helpless, and the children's confusion mirrored the collapse of the illusion that they had been entitled to my property. I stepped onto the terrace as the family scrambled, collecting their belongings under supervision, and felt a strange sense of quiet satisfaction. The house, my home, was finally being returned to me. Lillian's expressions of shock and fear confirmed what I already knew: they had underestimated me at every turn. As the last of the boxes were loaded into the cars, I took a deep breath and prepared to survey the aftermath, knowing the next step would be restoring the home I had built. The house was finally empty, the echoes of chaos fading into silence. I walked through each room, taking in the damage with a critical eye. The cushions were stained, the rugs needed deep cleaning, and some furniture had been scratched or displaced beyond repair. I began organizing a professional cleaning service, scheduling them to scrub every surface, wash the fabrics, and restore the house as close as possible to its original condition. As they worked, I moved methodically through the rooms, cataloging missing or damaged items. Some belongings were irretrievable, like the fragile porcelain plates I had collected over years, but photographs, documents, and small mementos had been recovered. The process was tedious and exhausting, yet I felt a growing sense of control. Each item restored, each corner cleaned, was a tangible reclaiming of my space and my life. The emotional scars, however, were harder to erase. I remembered Lillian's words, the smirks of her family, and the way I had felt small and powerless. Anger and hurt still simmered beneath the surface, but I could feel a shift, an emerging sense of empowerment. This house had been violated, but it had not defeated me. I had survived the humiliation, and now I had the tools to assert myself and protect what was mine. I paused in the living room, looking at the sunlight filtering through the windows, imagining the house as it once had been orderly, peaceful, and entirely my own. This restoration was not only physical but symbolic, a reclaiming of dignity and agency. With the cleaning underway and repairs scheduled, I turned my thoughts toward the next steps. There was more to be done, not just to recover the home, but to ensure that I would never face such betrayal unprepared again. The next phase required careful planning and vigilance as I set about securing the house for the future. With the house returning to order, I turned my attention to the younger members of the family, the nieces and nephews who had been caught in the middle of Lillian's scheme. They were innocent, unaware of the deeper motives behind the chaos that had unfolded in my home. I invited them over individually, spending time teaching them about boundaries, respect, and the importance of valuing other people's property. At first, they were hesitant, their eyes wide with confusion, unsure of how to navigate the tension between their mother and me. I approached them gently, sharing stories of my own mistakes and lessons learned, encouraging them to ask questions and express their feelings. Slowly, walls came down, replaced by small moments of trust and understanding. Even as I nurtured these connections, I maintained a cautious distance from those who had caused harm. Lillian and her older children were off limits, at least for now. I could not allow their previous actions to undermine the lessons I wanted to instill or the safety of my home. My focus was on the young ones, helping them recognize right from wrong without letting the betrayal of adults define their perception of family. We spent afternoons in the garden, planting flowers and tending vegetables together. Each activity a quiet reminder of the care and effort that make a space and relationships flourish. The house began to feel alive again, not just as a structure, but as a place where guidance and connection could grow. Watching the children laugh, asking questions, and genuinely listening, I felt a cautious optimism. Bonds could be rebuilt, slowly, carefully, without erasing the lessons of the past. I knew that some wounds from the family betrayal would never fully heal, but moments like this offered proof that trust and understanding could grow anew in the spaces where respect and accountability were nurtured. As the sun dipped low over the terrace, I realized the work of protecting both my home and these fragile connections was far from over, and the next steps would require planning and vigilance. With the house restored and the younger family members slowly reconnecting, I took a step back to reflect on the past weeks. The legal battle, the confrontation, and the painstaking process of reclaiming my home had left their marks, but they had also revealed a strength I hadn't fully recognized in myself. I had fought for my autonomy, defended my property, and emerged with both justice and dignity intact. The lessons were clear vigilance, preparation, and knowing your own worth are crucial when others attempt to overstep boundaries. I realized that empowerment isn't just about asserting authority in the moment. It's about creating systems that protect you and those who rely on you. I began implementing measures to ensure my home could never be so easily violated again, updating locks, installing security cameras, and formalizing legal protections to prevent any future disputes. Each step reinforced a sense of control and stability that had been absent during the invasion. Beyond my personal space, I felt a responsibility to share what I had learned. I started speaking with young adults and peers, offering guidance on protecting their assets and recognizing early signs of exploitation. Sharing my story became a way to transform my anger and pain into purpose. Conversations about boundaries, respect, and legal preparedness helped others navigate situations I had only just endured, and in doing so, I discovered a renewed sense of meaning and connection, even as I reinforced my independence and advocated for others. I knew that life would continue to test me in subtle ways, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a quiet confidence that I could meet those challenges on my terms. I moved through the house, checking that every room, every lock, and every security system was in place, aware that the next chapter of my life would be defined not by betrayal, but by the careful, deliberate choices I made to protect my future. The house had regained its quiet rhythm, each room restored to the order I had worked so hard to maintain. I moved through the spaces slowly, touching the polished surfaces, checking that every lock was secure, and noting the presence of the new security cameras. This home was more than walls and furniture. It was a testament to my perseverance, my independence, and the years I had devoted to building something that belonged entirely to me. The memories of the intrusion, though still sharp, had begun to fade, replaced by a steady sense of control and accomplishment. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, the shock of betrayal, the humiliation, and the anger had been overwhelming at first. But each step I had taken documenting damages, securing finances, and taking legal action had strengthened my resolve. I had learned that asserting boundaries is not only necessary but vital, and that standing firm in the face of family betrayal requires both courage and strategy. Even as I claimed victory, I approached the relationships around me with care. I continued mentoring my nieces and nephews, teaching them about respect, responsibility, and the value of integrity. With Lillian and the family members who had caused harm, I maintained a careful distance, protecting both my emotional well-being and the lessons I wanted to impart. Each encounter was deliberate, a balance between openness and caution, ensuring that past mistakes would not repeat themselves. Sitting on the terrace as the sun sank into the Pacific, I felt a quiet pride. The house, the life I had built, and the dignity I had defended were mine to protect and cherish. It stood as a symbol of resilience, a physical reminder of what can be achieved through determination and courage. The experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of strength, autonomy, and the meaning of justice. I knew now that life would continue to bring challenges, but I was ready, confident in my ability to face them with clarity and resolve. As the last light faded over the water, I looked out at the horizon and breathed in the salt-tinged air, feeling at peace in the home that I had fought to preserve and would continue to safeguard for the years to come. By the time I pulled off 6th Avenue and turned toward the quiet grid of North Tacoma, my body felt like a shell. 16 hours of tying rebar and moving steel on the Point Ruston site had hollowed me out. My shoulders still ached from the rain-soaked beams. My hands throbbed from rope burns, and the grit of cement dust clung to my skin no matter how many times I rubbed my palms together on the steering wheel. All I wanted was the same thing I'd wanted every night since I was a girl in this house: a shower hot enough to sting, food that didn't come from a drive-through bag, and the chance to close my eyes without anyone asking for more. The streets glistened with the drizzle that never quite leaves this city, and I parked in front of the craftsman house I'd painted once with my father, Graham, back when he was still home more often than not. The maple tree out front bent in the damp breeze, just as it always had. I climbed the porch steps, shoulders sagging under my duffel, and slid my key into the lock. It stopped cold. I jiggled it, tried again, felt the old brass resist me like I was a stranger. For a moment, I thought I had lost my grip from fatigue. But then the door opened, and there she was. Diane stood framed in the porch light, hair knotted up like she'd spent the day at yoga, leggings spotless, phone still glowing in her hand. Her smile was the kind that meant she'd been waiting for this exact second. Behind her, Kellen, her son, never mine, was stretched across the couch, my old Pacific Lutheran hoodie on his back, his laugh bouncing off the walls like he had inherited them too. "You're back early," Diane said, like the locks hadn't just refused me. "The key doesn't work," I told her, my voice rough from dust. "We changed them," she replied, voice calm and sharp as glass. "For safety." Her tone made clear whose safety she meant, and the sight of Kellen reaching into a bag of chips I'd bought told me everything else. My fingers curled tighter around the useless key. I stepped back onto the porch, the air colder than before, already sensing the weight of the fight I hadn't yet named. And when she leaned against the frame with that smile, I knew this night was only the beginning of a longer demand waiting on the other side of her words. Diane didn't waste time dressing the moment in pleasantries. She crossed her arms and said the locks were changed because I had fallen behind. She pulled a folded sheet of paper from the counter, like she had rehearsed the performance. "Back rent, utilities, household contributions," she recited, tapping the columns she had drawn in neat handwriting. $50,000. Pay up and you can stay under this roof. Behind her. Kellen let out a low whistle and tossed his phone onto the couch. "That's just one decent union paycheck, isn't it? You'll be fine." He grinned like he'd scored a point, then dragged my hoodie tighter around his shoulders, as if ownership came just from wearing what was mine. I felt the weight of the duffel digging into my arm, but didn't set it down. My eyes moved past Diane's smug expression, cataloging details the way I did on the job site when a beam didn't sit flush. Fresh screws gleamed on the strike plate, bright silver against weathered brass. On the hall table, a locksmith's card sat half-covered by a scented candle. The evidence of their coordination was all in plain sight, waiting for me to notice. "Did Dad approve this?" I asked finally. My voice stayed steady, though the words were jagged in my throat. Diane's smirk didn't falter. "He's consulting overseas. While he's gone, this is my house, my rules." Her certainty hit harder than her numbers. For her, the demand wasn't about bills or fairness. It was about power, about rewriting who held the right to stand in the doorway. I let the silence stretch between us, my hand loosening on the useless key. No shouting, no bargaining. I stepped back, the porch boards creaking under my boots. Diane raised her chin as if she'd won, but I was already calculating what her performance had exposed. Without another word, I turned and walked down the steps, the night air cutting colder as I headed back toward the truck and the memory that waited in the red file I had never dared to open until now. The porch light faded behind me as I walked back to the truck, but the weight in my chest carried me farther back than the street ahead. Memories clung to that house like smoke in the walls, each one sharper now that I'd been locked out. After my mother's funeral, Dad remarried quicker than I understood. Diane came through the doorway with boxes that smelled like department stores, setting them down on top of the cinnamon candles my mom had always lit on winter nights. Within weeks, the photographs of my mother were taken down, replaced with glossy prints of bridges and skylines that meant nothing to anyone who lived there. The scent of cinnamon disappeared, replaced with lavender sprays and a refrigerator shelf stocked with Kellen's energy drinks. Dad thought he was giving me stability when he left for contracts overseas, but the house never stayed steady. Every time a faucet dripped or the furnace rattled, it was me crawling under sinks or tightening bolts. I learned to carry that house on my shoulders the way I carried rebar, silently, hoping someone would notice. No one ever did. On my 21st birthday, Dad had flown back briefly between jobs. He took me to a notary's office in the Stadium District, the kind of place that smelled like old paper and ink. He handed me documents without much explanation, only saying it was for security. I signed where he pointed, half aware, wondering why my birthday gift came with so much formality. When I asked what it meant, he told me to keep the file safe, maybe forever unused. "Think of it as a map," he said, "one you may never have to unfold. I had tucked that red file away in the lockbox in my truck, unopened, trusting his word. Now, standing in the cold street after Diane's demand, I knew exactly where that map was waiting. I refused to stand on the porch like a beggar waiting for permission to cross a threshold that had once been mine. The truck engine carried me away from the house, down the wet curve of Ruston Way, where the smell of salt water mixed with diesel. At the construction site, the skeletal frame of steel beams loomed against the night sky, tarps snapping in the wind like restless sails. I pulled my duffel from the cab, spread it on a plywood platform beneath the scaffolding, and wrapped a neon safety vest across my chest for warmth. It wasn't comfort, but it was mine, and no one could change the locks on concrete still waiting to set. The night pressed heavy. I lay flat, listening to the rain patter through gaps in the tarp, watching the cranes sway above me like shadows of giants. Every ache in my body reminded me of the day, but it was the silence that hollowed deeper. I thought of the house not as it stood now, but as it used to be cinnamon candles in the kitchen, my mother's hugs long enough to mend everything broken. Those ghosts filled the cold air around me, and for once, I didn't push them away. Before dawn, I sat up, breath visible in the sharp air, and reached into the lockbox fixed behind my seat in the truck. The red file rested where it had for years, edges worn from being moved but never opened. My hands hesitated, then pulled it out. Inside lay 3 pieces of recorded deed naming me sole owner of the property on North 26th, dated on my 21st birthday, a limited power of attorney tied to emergencies, and an unsigned letter in my father's handwriting. The paper trembled in my grip as I read it. If you ever feel the air get tight at home, this is why. The words settled over me heavier than the scaffolding above. I had been carrying proof without knowing it, a weapon wrapped in silence. For years, I thought loyalty meant waiting, fixing leaks, paying bills, enduring Diane's rules. Now the truth sat in my lap, sharp as any tool I'd ever swung, and I knew it was time to decide how to use it as the first light of morning touched the beams overhead. By the time the courthouse clock struck 8, I was already walking up Pacific Avenue, the red file pressed against my ribs like armor. I hadn't slept much after opening it, the weight of the deed and my father's note thrumming in my mind. But exhaustion felt easier to bear than the memory of Diane's smirk. I stopped in front of a narrow brick building where the plaque on the glass read, Eamon Brackett, attorney at law. Inside, the office smelled faintly of old wood polish and brewed coffee. Eamon himself looked nothing like the sharp-edged lawyers from television. His hair was thinning, his tie slightly off-center, but his eyes carried the kind of patience that comes from years of watching people arrive on the worst day of their lives. I sat across from him and opened the red file. I told him everything, how Diane had changed the locks, how she had demanded $50,000 in back rent, how Kellen laughed while wearing what wasn't his. My voice wavered only once, when I described turning the key and feeling it stop dead in the lock. Eamon didn't interrupt. He simply nodded, glanced at the papers, and made a few notes in neat block letters. When I finished, he tapped the deed. "This is clean," he said. "Recorded, valid, and unambiguous, which means we don't argue with them. We let the law do the talking. Washington law requires you to serve a 20-day notice to terminate a month-to-month tenancy. If they refuse, you file an unlawful detainer case here in Pierce County Superior Court. The court issues a writ of restitution. The sheriff enforces it." I frowned. "So I can't just—" "No," he cut in gently. "You don't change locks back. You don't throw their things out. That's self-help eviction. Illegal. Even if you're the owner, you wait. You document. Every call, every text, every demand. You let the court see who's reasonable and who isn't." His calmness steadied me more than I expected. Fury still burned in my chest, but he gave it direction. We arranged for a professional process server to deliver the notice. Eamon handed me a checklist for an evidence binder photographs, bills, proof of payment, copies of every message. When I left the office, the drizzle along Pacific felt less like weight and more like clarity. I had a path forward, not fast, but certain, and I was ready to take the first step that would lead me straight back to Diane's door. That night, I sat in the cab of my truck with a yellow pad balanced on my knee, the deed open beside me. Anger tempted me to write in all caps, to throw Diane's words back at her. But Eamon's voice stayed with me. Keep it measured. Keep it professional. So I wrote, "No rent is owed. I am the recorded owner. Enclosed is the 20-day notice to terminate occupancy. Any further communication regarding this matter should be directed to counsel." I typed it clean, printed 2 copies, and sealed one in a thick white envelope marked clearly with Diane's name. The other I sent by certified mail. A twin she couldn't claim to have missed. At dawn, the process server I'd hired drove off with the envelope, leaving me with nothing but waiting. I parked 2 blocks down from the house, hands tight on the steering wheel, watching the porch through a thin gap between cedar hedges. At 9 sharp, Diane stepped out in her slippers, phone already in her hand, a mug of coffee steaming against the morning chill. She bent, picked up the envelope, and tore it open without hesitation. The scream that followed rattled through the street like a siren. Curtains lifted in the neighboring houses. Dogs barked. Even a car braked mid-block. Kellen stumbled into the doorway, hair matted, hoodie sliding off one shoulder. He grabbed the papers, eyes scanning as his mouth moved. A curse burst out, then another. Moments later, his face appeared online, shaky video already climbing through feeds. "She's heartless," he spat into the camera. "Throwing out family for nothing. My stepsister's a monster." The comments poured in faster than I could scroll, strangers cursing my name. Distant cousins demanding explanations. Old acquaintances pretending they'd always known I was cruel. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I screenshotted every post, saved every voicemail, noted every name. Proof wasn't measured in likes or outrage. It was stacked in binders for a judge to read. By the time the video spun out of control, I had closed the laptop and opened the binder, sliding the first screenshot into its sleeve, preparing for the weeks that stretched ahead. The 20-day clock began with silence, but Diane was never one to leave a stage empty for long. On the 5th morning, 2 Tacoma police officers knocked on the window of my truck while I was parked outside the site. Diane had called in a trespass, claiming I was harassing her. I showed them the deed and the notice. They exchanged a look that told me they'd seen this kind of family theater before, then left with a clipped, "It's a civil matter." I logged the time, date, and badge numbers in the binder. A week later, Diane threatened a restraining order, her text dripping with official-sounding language, though nothing ever materialized. By then, she was also telling relatives that my father had promised the house in spirit to her and Kellen, as if intentions could rewrite recorded deeds. Each call from a cousin or aunt went straight to voicemail, saved and transcribed before I filed it away. I met with Eamon twice more, his calm steadiness a counterweight to the chaos Diane kept manufacturing. He told me to keep photographing the property, especially the rooms she'd claimed as hers, and to log every utility I had covered in the past year. I printed receipts, marked dates, and stacked them neatly. Evidence grew in the binder like scaffolding around an unfinished tower. Mrs. Sato, the retired schoolteacher across the street, stopped me one afternoon. In her gentle way, she confirmed she'd seen a locksmith's van parked outside the day before the locks changed. She offered to testify if it came to that. I thanked her and added her name to the growing list of witnesses. As the deadline drew close, the tone of the messages shifted. Anonymous texts urged me to show mercy, to remember family, but mercy, as they defined it, meant surrendering the very roof over my head. I copied each message into the binder and turned the page, knowing the countdown was leading me straight toward the courthouse. The deadline came and went, and Diane stayed put. Eamon filed the unlawful detainer the next morning, and within days we were standing beneath the high ceilings of Pierce County Superior Court. The room smelled faintly of varnished wood and paper dust, the kind of place where words mattered more than noise. Diane wore a blazer too crisp for someone who claimed poverty, her hair tied back tight, eyes sharp with defiance. Kellen sat behind her, restless, phone in hand like he couldn't survive without an audience. When the commissioner called the case, Diane launched into a story about family equity, about promises my father had made in spirit if not in writing. She spoke of informal rent, contributions she claimed I owed for the privilege of growing up in that house. But when pressed for proof, there was none. No lease, no receipts, no legal thread tying her story to the walls she clung to. Eamon placed the deed on the bench, then the 20-day notice, then the binder with photographs, receipts, and statements. My name repeated across the pages like a steady refrain. The commissioner's decision was brief. Almost surgical possession restored to me, writ of restitution to be issued, interference prohibited. Diane's mouth opened as if to argue, but the gavel came down, final and firm. Outside, the cold air carried Kellen's voice as he ranted into his phone camera, calling me heartless, a traitor to family. Strangers passing gave curious glances, but Eamon touched my elbow, guiding me down the steps without a word. The order was in hand, the date set, and for the first time in weeks, the ground beneath me felt solid as we walked toward the parking lot where everything would soon change again, the morning of the writ. I stood on the curb, binder tucked under my arm, waiting for the deputy to arrive. The street was quiet except for the drip of last night's rain from the eaves. Then a familiar sedan pulled into view, one I hadn't seen in too many years. My father stepped out, thinner than I remembered, but steadier, as though distance had stripped away the fog he once lived under. "Leora," he said, his voice low, carrying both apology and resolve. "I've filed for divorce. I should have done it sooner. I see her clearly now, and I see what I left you with." I searched his face, looking for hesitation, but he held my gaze. He explained what I already held in my hands, that the deed had been his way of guarding me while he was thousands of miles away. He had feared exactly this day might come, and the map he gave me had led me here. The sheriff's deputy arrived, crisp uniform and quiet authority cutting through the tension. Diane emerged with arms crossed, Kellen dragging behind her with boxes half-packed. Under the deputy's eye, they moved through the house, stripping it of what little claim they had left. At the doorway, Diane spun toward me, her voice sharp and desperate. "You owe us for family," before I could answer. My father stepped forward. His words were even, but they carried more weight than any raised voice. Family does not invoice belonging. By sunset, the house stood quiet again. Their voices had vanished, their clutter packed away, leaving only the hum of the furnace and the creak of floors that finally belonged to me without contest. I stepped across the threshold, ready for the silence that awaited. That evening, I walked barefoot across the hardwood, each step steady, each switch flipped on, not from fear, but from ceremony. The house glowed as if reminding me it had always been waiting, patient through the years of noise and intrusion. In the living room, I unwrapped the framed photo of my mother that had been boxed for too long and rehung it on the wall where Diane once hung bland, abstract prints. The sight of her smile settled the air in a way no candle ever could. The locks came next. I unscrewed the hardware with deliberate care, fitting new mechanisms into place. This time, the keys were mine alone, cut fresh at a shop on 6th Avenue, their edges sharp with promise. The scar left on the front door from the locksmith's drill would need fixing, so I scheduled a carpentry job, determined to mend what had been forced open. Over the next days, I worked through the details that matter more than most people realize. Over coffee along Ruston Way, I made lists, boundaries, maintenance, choices. I forwarded certified copies of the court order to the utilities, closed unauthorized accounts Diane had opened in my name, and sat down to draft a final letter through Eamon's office, a line drawn in ink to end any further contact. By the time I locked the front door with my own key, The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a beginning, a place I could rebuild on my terms. The walls carried my history, but the silence belonged to me. And as I stood in the doorway, I knew the story I carried forward was finally my own.